Hi, everyone. This is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle Cluster API Office Hours on the 10th of November 2021. We abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct. What that means is be mindful and awesome to each other. And if you wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. It's under the reactions section. Please go ahead and add your names onto the attendees list and we'll get started. First, PSAs. Fabrizio, you have the first one. Is Fabrizio here?
Yeah, hopefully a short one. So last week we had a discussion about the Ignition PR, and I tried to summarize what we discussed last week, what we discussed in the past about the future of Bootstrap stuff and the split between machine Bootstrap and Node Bootstrap. So I added a comment. Please take a look if you are interested to the topic, especially the team that is working, that will be responsible for maintaining the Ignition stuff. Please take a look, add a thumbs up, thumbs down, or comment if you feel that something should be improved.
Thanks for that summary, Fabrizio. Yeah, please, people who are interested in the Ignition work, please go ahead and take a look at that. Tilo, you have your hands up raised.
And you're muted.
I'm double muted again. Sorry, I'm hardware mute button and Zoom still keeps muting me anyways. Sorry. I see a lot of nodding folks. That's reassuring. Thanks. All right. So we entirely agree with the comment. We stepped a little bit back on speaking up on the PR directly because it feels a little like the comment is segueing into a larger strategic decision of Cluster API. So we wanted to wait for the meeting. But other than that, it's pretty much what we lined out in the previous meeting, I guess.
Matt was, sorry, I got your name wrong. Please go ahead.
No worries, thanks. Yeah, so from what I understand, so we are the maintainer, like we're the owners of the code, and we're maintaining the Ignition version 1, right, which is currently only used by Flatcar and probably other distros. If they want to adopt Ignition, they should probably adopt version 2. So I was just curious about like what kind of commitment, like on top of the maintaining the existing code we want to add, you're looking for, Fabrizio. Do you want us to help and dip in for the other issues or the PRs which are mentioned in this comment, or is it mainly about just the maintenance of this code?
That would be great. So I think that what we agreed is that we are accepting Ignition because we don't have let me say a better separation between Node Bootstrap and machine Bootstrap. But given the discussion of last week about dependencies, different version of Ignition and stuff like that, I think that we should agree that that's fine for now. But if in the future we want to support a new version of Ignition, or we want to add more something relevant on top of what we have, we should not, let me say, continue to increase the technical debt. We should go pay down the root problem of the cause and go on with a cleaner solution that everyone is happy with. So it will be great if you can start contributing to make it happen. Help will be really appreciated, but it is not mandatory now. It is mandatory before any big upgrade to this feature. Does this make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So the main thing which comes to my mind is that the Flatcar, as far as I know, will soon support Ignition version 3. So when we reach this point, we'll likely want to upgrade like this code to also to also use this, because this will automatically enable like using that on the Fedora core OS, for example, I think. So yeah, I'm wondering if this will also be blocked like by the current commitment then until the other problems are resolved.
Alberto, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll anticipate that when that's the case, that the Flatcar introduce support for ignition spec v3. The way that PR is now, it might be problematic because we have that additional ignition config field. Right now, the expectation is for users to add ignition spec 2 right through that API field, and that works fine today because that's the expectation for Flatcar. But say tomorrow you want to run a new machine with a new version of Flatcar, so you need to somehow manually ensure that the additional config plays well with the new Flatcar version. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So as far as I know, the Flatcar will have some backward compatibility, but yeah, for the ignition version 3, I was thinking that perhaps the butane the precompiler can be used, and that would be yet another addition to this API actually then. So yeah, I don't know.
So the way I see it, that's when the refactoring comes in, right? So that's kind of the motivation of Fabricio's comment. So that's why it makes so much sense to me.
Vince?
Just some clarification on this whole conversation. I think like for now, you know, truthfully, if this was brought up today, I probably have proposed to put this in a different repo, given that it's like specific to Flatcar, but we're way ahead of that. So the Bootstrap provider today with KubeADM and Ignition in the future and Cloud Init, like we'll see it is, but we do have plans to break this apart. And when that happens, like I would say, like we should put a code freeze into it, which goes back to Fabrizio's comments, like what is the support on this? So maybe we should, like one action item that I could take from here is to send out an email to the mailing list, say that like KPK is going to be froze at some point, and we need to understand where at some point is. Could be 1.1, could be 1.2, and maybe it's frozen for just new features, not just for bug fixes or like small improvements. Because if like we need to add more of these VM bootstrappers, it's going to take like a toll on like supporting the whole code base. And so we can say like before we want to add anything net new to this code base, the precursor or like prerequisite, we need to split up this code base into a model that actually works and it's more pluggable. Does that sound okay for everybody if I take that action item to send out that email to the mailing list, and then at the next, or like in a couple of weeks, we can decide what is the release where we would say like there's a feature freeze on just KPK for now.
Yes.
Yeah, one quick question, Vince. So does this timeline account for anything that is merged in the proposal folder but not yet implemented regarding KPK? Things like machine node attestation and things like that.
Yes, it will be for everything. Like the code is like in a way right now, like a structure that like if we do add more to it, like we'll never break it apart. And to avoid that, like we should probably like put a stop like into any new development, like before it's too late. You know, it's like we have to support this forever and ever. So like things like node attestation could come in the form of like as an addition to when we break apart the node bootstrapping, which would be like a feature of node bootstrapping truthfully, rather than being a feature of necessarily VM bootstrapping.
I don't see any more hands raised. Does anyone have any follow-up questions, comments, concerns? Okay, if that's all, then I guess we can move on to the next PSA. Cecile, you have this one.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just repeating myself from last week in case you missed it. So we opened a discussion to kind of try to gather feedback on what should be the next big features that we work on. So if you haven't taken a look, please take a look. If you have anything to add to it, feel free to add it in there. And also like go ahead and upvote issues that others posted that you think are important. Let's try to stay focused on like bigger features. This doesn't mean like everything we're going to work on in the next 6 months needs to be in here. This is more like the big themes. For example, separating node bootstrapping and VM bootstrapping would be a great one for this. I think it's already in there actually. So let's just try to like kind of decide what is important to us for the next phase as a community and what we want to focus on. That being said, just because these features get upvoted and get picked doesn't mean that they are going to be done. It just means that it's the things that we as a community want to focus on, but then of course it's dependent on people actually like picking them up and doing the work and having enough resources to get them done. Yeah, please vote. I'll also send a mailing list note this afternoon to like summarize this for people who aren't in this meeting.
Thanks, Cecile. Yeah, everyone, please go take a look and upvote issues that you find interesting, and please do add items that you would want to see. There are no more PSAs. Let's move on to open proposals. There are still a few proposals that are marked needs review. Does anyone have anything to say about these? I don't see any hands raised. Let's continue. Discussion topics. Oh, I have the first one. This is about ClusterCuttle demo. So ClusterCuttle right now supports using cluster classes for both the generate and the move commands. And I can quickly demo how that works. Once again. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have two clusters here, source cluster, target cluster. So I'll be using the source cluster first to demo how we can use ClusterCuttle generate command to now generate cluster templates that use managed topologies. And then once we do that, we can then look at how we can use ClusterCuttle move to move items out from one cluster to the other, and how it also takes care of moving topologies and cluster classes and so on. So I've already initialized both the clusters with the Docker provider. I'll be using Docker provider for this example, and I'm using a local registry. So let's take a look at what files I have in my local registry first. So I have a template called cluster template topology, and I have a corresponding cluster class. So let me show you how this template looks like. So you can see that the template right now only has just the clustered object, and this vastly simplifies how we define templates. So instead of having clusters infra cluster and then Docker machines and infra machines and so on. We just need a cluster definition in our template at this point. It uses the same standard variables that we have, like the Kubernetes version, the control plane machine count, the worker machine count. But the change is it uses a managed topology and it points to a class called the demo class, demo cluster class. And as you just saw, we have that file within our repository at this point, with my local repository at this point. So when I do run the cluster generate command, the expectation is it's going to take a look at this, look at the class definition, check if it is already installed in the cluster. If not, fetch it and add it to the output template. So let's take a look at the cluster cuttle. So if I do that, so now you can see that even though the template only had the cluster definition, it adds the associated cluster class needed. For example, now it added the cluster class, all the templates associated with that cluster class, and also at the end, it has the cluster definition with all the variables filled in, right? And if we can go ahead and apply this. And as you can see, the signature of the cluster generate has not changed at all. So it's going to look exactly how we have in our quick start guide right now. And I'm pointing to a different flavor of the template. So I'm just pointing to a flavor of the cluster template, which uses managed topologies. And now we can see that it has the cluster. Okay, I have two watches here, just if you are interested, one on KCP and one on machines, just to keep an eye on if things are working. And it also has the cluster class installed. One thing to note here is cluster generate right now does take into consideration if the class is already installed. What I mean by that is if we rerun the same and try to create another cluster, like a demo 2 cluster using the same topology, using the same flavor, meaning it's using the same underlying cluster class, we see that this time the output YAML only contains the cluster because the cluster class that it's pointing to is already installed in the cluster. So it just skips adding that into the template. So at this point, it only has the cluster. You can go ahead and apply this file as well, and it should not break anything that we already have in the system. So that's how generate works. And there is a doc. I've linked updated documentation in our office notes today to show like what are the provider contracts needed for any provider to be able to now support or opt into using cluster classes for some of their templates if they want to. Right? We'll take a look at that as well. Okay, the cluster is up, my KCP is running. So let's now take a look at move. So as I mentioned, I already have 2 clusters. I have a target cluster already set up. It is already initialized with the correct version and so on. So let me just perform the move cluster cuttle dev move. So I'm just moving to the target cluster. And again, the signature of this has not changed at all. So it's going to use exactly the same. It's going to maintain the exact same signature, and it's going to take care of moving the clusters and the associated cluster classes. So as you can see, the KCP objects have vanished from the current cluster that I've been using. And if we just switch the context, target cluster, we see that the target cluster now has the objects. And the thing to definitely note is that the cluster class and all of the associated templates are also now on the target cluster. So this shows that the cluster class has been like integrated with our move commands, our generate commands. And for those who are interested, since backup and restore underlying uses the same tooling as move, so cluster cuttle backup and restore also now works with cluster class. That's the end of the demo. If there are any questions, I can answer them, or else I can show you the provider contract doc. Sissy, please go ahead.
Thanks. This is super awesome. I just have two questions. First one is, you said that if the cluster class is already there on the cluster, it won't put it back in the template. Can you also do something like pre-install the cluster class on your management cluster, like just apply the cluster class, and then will it work the same way afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And then my other question is, where, like right now you're doing this in a demo, in a like dev environment where you have the config locally, but in a scenario where you're getting the template with the flavor from the release artifacts, where would it find the cluster class from? Does it find it in the release artifacts as well?
Yes, it looks for the cluster class file in the release artifacts as well. And there is a naming convention associated with it. So the name of the file is supposed to be cluster class hyphen the name of the class .yaml. Right, similar to how we have definitions for flavors, right? So it's going to follow similar kind. And these rules have been documented in the provider contract doc. So let me just show that quickly. So provider contract for cluster has been updated, and we have a new section for how cluster class definitions should be, and what the naming scheme should be, and what things to keep in mind while writing the cluster class definitions and so on. Like there are some rules regarding namespace, like not having namespaces in the references because those can change, and notes about we do not support variables in cluster class definitions at this point because that's an anti-pattern. We want cluster classes itself to be definitions of how cluster is supposed to look like, and so on. So the doc is updated. Please go take a look and see if there are any points missing, or if there are any open questions, and we can go ahead and update the doc to answer all of them as well.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, cool. And for folks interested, the move that I just showed is still in a PR right now. It's being reviewed. So if you're interested, please go take a look at that. That's the end of that topic. I have the next one as well. Unless there are any questions, I can move on to the next one. Anything in chat? No. No hands raised. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So the next one is very simple. So there is going to be a TGIK session on December 10th. We volunteered to do that, and the topics that we want to cover during that, we can talk about during that are like the V1 release, and we can work on cluster class and so on. So basically looking to see if there are any volunteers who would want to co-present this session in TGIK with me. The session is like very informal. It's just like a hands-on session where you like spin up stuff and then work and see how it operates and so on. It's very informal, it's very hands-on. It can be as unstructured as you want or as structured as you want. So it's a great way to get some exposure, great way to look at new things, and great way to basically do some public speaking. So if anyone is interested, please do reach out and we can make it happen. Moving on to the next one, Mike, you have this.
Yeah, thanks. I noticed that the agenda was kind of light today, so I figured I'd ask a question that I'm kind of struggling with at the moment. So I'm trying to implement a feature in the KubeMark provider, and this feature involves flags that only exist in newer versions of Kubernetes. So it requires a newer version of KubeMark. And I was curious if there was like an idiomatic way within this community that, you know, people are checking the kube version from within the actuator for their machine reconciler. You know, like I had a suggestion from a colleague to, you know, just kind of get the API URL and hack the version off the end of it. But I was curious if there was maybe like a more positive way to check through the API. Right, I'm guessing since no one's raising their hands that maybe I should just go with the hacky way to do it. All right, cool. Thanks. We can. Oh, Vince, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was trying to find the reason. I forget. Just to clarify, this is like within the machine actuator to check the Kubernetes version? Like, are you talking about the Kubernetes version that's on the machine, or it's on the spec? It's like the one that.
So like, for example, one way I saw the machine deployment, has the Kubernetes version on it. So like I could, at least in this record, so I could get the machine deployment and then look at the version. Is that, Cecile, is that M machine spec version? Is that kind of the easy way to check it, I guess?
I mean, that's the version that's on the spec of the machine itself. That's what we use in CAPZ for getting the Kubernetes version for example,
Okay.
getting the default image. I don't know if that's what you're asking though.
Well, let me back up and answer Vince's question. So basically, the way the KubeMark provider works is that when we reconcile the machines, all we're doing is starting a pod that runs the KubeMark binary. And that KubeMark binary is generated from the Kubernetes main repo, and it includes a series of flags that come with it. And so like there's a flag that I want to use for this feature, but I can only get access to it in versions of Kubernetes like 1.22 and higher. So when I'm about to start this pod in the machine actuator, which actually becomes a machine, I need to be able to check the Kubernetes version to make sure that I'm not deploying this in such a way where like the flag won't exist. Because if the flag doesn't exist, then the pod just goes into like an eternal crash loop, basically. So I need at that point, all I'm doing is reconciling the machine at that point, but I need to be able to check the version of Kubernetes that the whole thing is being applied to, so that I can say, okay, that this binary probably is, version X or greater, so I can use, this flag that I want to use. So that's really what I'm trying to get to here.
Yassine?
Yeah, I think Cecile's comment is right. As long as you have an owner references, or you're able to walk from your infra machine to the owning machine, machine spec version should reflect the source of truth.
Vince?
So just one clarification, machine spec version, if I remember correctly, is still optional. So, you got to deal with that too, potentially, but, if you control the whole pipeline, that should be fine. There is also something in status, which we copy from the node. So like if your machine has a Kubernetes node attached to it and the node has node info, which it does have the components versions in there that you could parse as well.
I'm wondering if that would even be, well, it must be accurate. Like, because these are hollow nodes. I don't know.
Right.
That's back.
Yeah. I just wanted to call it out, like if you didn't check like that, it's there and synced.
Yeah. Cool. This is great. These are some good suggestions. Thank you. And yeah, I see Alex and Fabrizio kind of offering to help there. Like, yeah, if I am kind of beating up my head on this in the next couple of days, I'll definitely reach out for help. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Next one, Arvinder, you have this.
Hi, everyone. Just a quick request to take a look at this proposal. This is an item that's been around for a while, but looks like now we finally have some traction behind it. Short summary would be that basically it would be nice to have a flexible label syncing mechanism to label your worker nodes. So that's kind of what this proposal is. It goes into the motivation behind it and the use cases behind it. That's pretty much it.
Arvinder, can you please add this to the open proposals list so that it's brought up in the next meetings as well?
Will do, yes.
Thank you. I don't see any hands raised. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns on this proposal? Please do go take a look at it and then please leave feedback. I don't see any hands raised and we have a little time left. So is there anyone new in the meeting who would like to introduce themselves?
My name's Brad McCoy. This is my first time joining and keen to get into the SIG. I'm from New Zealand as well.
Hi, Brad. Welcome.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, that'll be all, folks. Thanks everyone for joining. See you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Yeah.